Hello, everyone. Welcome. I hope you're having a good evening. My name is Lara Morita. I am Senior Director for Community Planning and Engagement at the New York City Department of City Planning. I'm excited to be here tonight to have a conversation about the City of Yes for economic opportunity. Before we start, I have a few housekeeping notes, though. There will be American Sign Language interpretation throughout the duration of the presentation and conversation. In addition to ASL, we are also offering simultaneous interpretation today in Spanish, Mandarin, and Cantonese. Next slide, please. Thank you. I will read from this slide and then ask all the interpreters to please read as well. Please click on the interpretation icon for Spanish, Mandarin, or Cantonese to hear a simultaneous interpretation of the session. During the Q&A, staff will be available to provide language assistance for Spanish, Mandarin, and Cantonese speakers as needed. Spanish, Mandarin, and Cantonese speaking participants may also contact us for additional assistance via email at dcpcityofyes_dl@planning.nyc.gov. Would the Spanish interpreter please read the following sentence?
De preguntas si está disponible para interpretación lo necesite y nos puede contactar adicional ITYOFYES subraya de mayúscula e mayúscula @planing.nyc.gov.
Thank you so much. Would the Mandarin translator please speak?
Can you hear me? Good evening. The following announcement will be in Mandarin Chinese. 请点击同签发音的图标以及收听会议的西班牙语、普通话或粤语的同声传译。在提问环节期间，工作人员将根据需要为您提供西班牙语、普通话和粤语的翻译帮助。如果需要更多帮助，讲西班牙语、普通话或者粤语的翻译时，可以通过电子邮件的方式 dcp-yes-dl@planning.nyc.gov 与我们取得联系。谢谢。Thank you, and then you may proceed.
Thank you. And could the Cantonese interpreter?
This is a Cantonese interpreter. 請點擊以下同聲同傳嘅圖標，以收聽會議嘅西班牙語、國語或者粵語嘅同聲傳譯。在提問環節期間，喺 Q&A 啦，工作人員咧將根據需要咧為你提供西班牙文啦、國語啦同埋粵語嘅翻譯服務。如果需要更多幫助，請讓講西班牙文、國語或者粵語嘅參與者可以通過電子郵件嘅方式 dcp-cityofyes 下邊一行 dl@planning.nyc.gov 與我哋取得聯絡。多謝 Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Next slide, please. We will start with a presentation and then dedicate the rest of the meeting to hearing from you. During the presentation, if you have a question comes to mind, you can submit it by using the Q&A feature. Staff will collect the questions and queue them up for the live Q&A session. Once the presentation is over, we will move into the Q&A portion of the evening. You will have multiple ways you can participate. You can continue to submit questions, written questions into the Q&A function, or you can raise your hand if you wish to ask your question. When your name is called, you will be able to unmute and it'll give you the option to turn on your camera. If you are phoning in, please press *9, raise your hand, and staff will go over the instructions of how to unmic. Next slide, please. In addition, if you are having any technical issues, call the hotline number on the screen. The number is 877-853-5246 or toll free or toll number 212-338-8477. You will have a password of £1 and someone will be there to assist you. This technical hotline info can be found at the bottom of every slide in case you need assistance. Next slide, please. I am now happy to announce Edith Suchen, Executive Director of the Department of City Planning, is here with us and will offer a few words about the City of Yes. Edith?
Hi, thank you, Lara, and good evening, everyone. I'm Edith Suchen, Executive Director at the Department of City Planning. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening for our second info session on the City of Yes for Economic Opportunity Initiative. We're here tonight to discuss the second of Mayor Adams' 3 City of Yes zoning text amendments. They are collectively aimed at ensuring New York City emerges from the pandemic and into the 21st century as a more affordable, more prosperous, and a greener and healthier city. So to catch you up briefly, the first of these 3 initiatives is City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality. This proposal is aimed at ensuring that New Yorkers can install green energy technologies such as solar panels and electric vehicles can charge more easily and safely throughout the city. City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality started official public review in April and is currently being reviewed by 59 community boards and 5 borough presidents. Positive feedback is rolling in, and we've already gotten recommendations from 22 community boards, the Manhattan Borough Board, and borough presidents of Manhattan, Queens, and the Bronx. We'll hold a public hearing at the City Planning Commission on July 26th. And after that, it goes to the City Council for a vote this fall. The second text amendment, which is the subject of tonight's discussion, is City of Yes for Economic Opportunity. This proposal is about updating our zoning to give all New Yorkers access to vibrant commercial corridors, allowing more New Yorkers to start businesses and create jobs, and making it easier for businesses to grow and expand. Thank you all for tuning in tonight to hear more about this proposal. Last but not least, later this year, we'll host a public info session like this one about City of Yes for Housing Opportunity. This third proposal is about changing our zoning regulations to create more housing across the city. It's great to see so many people here tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. And now back to you, Lara.
Thank you so much, Edith. I appreciate that. Next slide. I will now turn it over to Matt Waskiewicz, who is the senior planner leading this work from our Economic Development and Regional Planning Division. Like I mentioned, Matt will go through this presentation and then we'll open it up for a discussion, and you're more than welcome to use the Q&A function to be able to add questions during the presentation. Thank you so much. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Lara, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Matt Waskiewicz. I'm a senior planner here at the New York City Department of City Planning, and I am the project manager for City of Yes for Economic Opportunity. I have about 30 minutes worth of presentation this evening, and then we'll leave time for ample questions at the end. So as Lara mentioned, please feel free to use the chat function throughout as questions occur to you. We'll also be making this presentation available its entirety on our website following today's session. Next slide, please. So we've been on a listening tour for much of the last year, talking to chambers of commerce, business improvement districts, industrial service providers, and other stakeholders across the city, and really trying to understand ways in which our zoning might be getting in the way of establishing or expanding a business. And so far, we've met with well over 100 groups. We've had 3 public information sessions. Tonight is our 4th, and we've heard from countless New Yorkers about challenges that you face in starting or expanding your businesses. And so this proposal has been shaped by your concerns. Next slide, please. And a lot of what we've heard is, let's face it, New York City can be a challenging place to run a business. And dealing with government regulation is oftentimes frustrating, slow, confusing, or simply illogical. And often, all of this red tape makes investing in businesses hard. And that in turn contributes to our city being less vibrant. Having fewer people able to start their business, having one more vacant storefront, having one more business having to leave their neighborhood or the city overall just to expand. Next slide. We also know that the pandemic made things even harder for some businesses. But in these difficult times, we saw silver linings and resilience in the ways that our commercial areas have adapted to crisis. Now, there are three key effects that we see coming out of the pandemic that are particularly relevant to bear in mind for this initiative. First, even before the pandemic, high storefront vacancy has affected the health of our city's retail corridors, and many new vacancies arose during the crisis. And while some commercial corridors have bounced back from the pandemic, others have not, and the ability to ensure that our streets can be repopulated with new and expanding businesses remains a chief concern. Second, we recognize that remote work presents a challenge to our office districts that are also suffering from high vacancy and undergoing a period of reinvention. But this moment is also an opportunity to reimagine our central business districts, as well as neighborhoods across the city, and support business closer to home as people spend more time in their home neighborhoods. Third, we can observe a number of new industries, such as life sciences, that are emerging in ways that can help accelerate the city's recovery and create good jobs in all 5 boroughs. Next slide, please. So how does zoning affect businesses across the city? And how does zoning fit into this? Zoning is what sets the stage for how businesses can physically locate in the city, because it's how our government sets rules for what kinds of businesses can open, where they can locate, how big they can be, and a number of other parameters that either dictate or constrain business location and operation. Next slide, please. And so what we've heard in our outreach is that our rules governing businesses, much of it more than 60 years old, is simply holding businesses back in many ways, either by restricting businesses outright from locating or regulating how they do business, or because of some old or complicated rule just not being clear in ways that all add up to cost businesses time and money. We want to make sure that our zoning works for our economy and not against it. And so our overarching vision for this initiative is to make sure that our zoning is more simple, more adaptable, and more modern. Next slide, please. Because ultimately, we think that a city that says yes to businesses thriving is one that is better for all of us. We believe that easier pathways for businesses means more kinds of businesses and fewer vacant storefronts. We believe it means more diversity in our neighborhoods, more fun, more family-friendly activities, more jobs, and a city that is just a bit easier to make it in. Next slide, please. So how do we achieve this? First, we want to expand options for businesses to locate closer to their customers. The main way we propose to do this is by removing zoning restrictions on particular businesses, allowing a more diverse range of businesses to locate in storefronts along our commercial corridors. These changes to zoning will allow more businesses to open and combat storefront vacancy by making it easier to fill empty space. Second, we want to support business and industry growth that can help catalyze the city's recovery and create good jobs across the city. We will do this by removing impediments or reducing ambiguity in zoning for specific industries, which will help these emerging businesses thrive across the city. Third, we want to foster more vibrant neighborhoods by increasing access to local goods and services and by activating our commercial streets. And fourth, and finally, we want to give more businesses more certainty and predictability on where they can locate and what they can do with their space. We aim to do this by clarifying and modernizing the way that our zoning regulates use, or the kinds of activities that are allowed to occur in a particular area. Next slide, please. I'll now go through each of the 18 proposals that we have to change our zoning to meet each of these goals. Next slide, please. Our first goal is about expanding options for businesses to locate. Through our outreach, we've learned a number of ways in which current zoning is inhibiting business location or expansion in locations that make sense. And so this goal is all about bringing new location options that help businesses grow near their customers. Next slide, please. Our first proposal is about removing zoning restrictions on ground floors. In some of our city's higher density commercial areas, such as Midtown South, as well as commercial corridors like 125th Street in Harlem or Main Street in Flushing, there are some kinds of businesses that are allowed to locate above the ground floor, but are prohibited from locating in a ground floor storefront. These businesses include things like art studios, instructional facilities, and clothing rental shops. We believe that these restrictions make no sense, and so we want to open up allowing these kinds of businesses to locate on the ground floor as well. Next slide, please. Proposal 2 is about allowing consistent uses in similar zoning districts. Today, our neighborhood retail corridors are typically zoned C1 or C2, while our higher density or more centrally located business districts are typically zoned C4, C5, or C6. And while there are sometimes important distinctions between these districts, zoning also sometimes makes arbitrary distinctions between what kinds of businesses can locate in each district. So as a result, you might be walking along a street and you might find that the left hand of the street allows movie theaters, but on the right side of the street, movie theaters are not allowed. Or you might be able to open up a bike sale shop on the right-hand side of the street, but if you also want to rent your bicycles, you might have to relocate to the left side of the street instead. So to simplify these distinctions and treat similar zoning districts in a similar way, we are proposing to allow a consistent mix of businesses across our C1 and C2 districts, and allow a consistent mix of businesses across our C4, C5, and C6 districts. This would remove arbitrary barriers along corridors that are getting in the way of businesses being able to locate in a particular area. Next slide, please. Proposal 3 would allow for small-scale clean manufacturing and production spaces to flourish across the city by allowing them for the first time in many of the city's commercial districts. Today, zoning allows for limited kinds of manufacturing to occur in Midtown, but it restricts most production activities to the city's industrial areas. Now, there are many kinds of clean production, things like food and beverage making, apparel design, jewelry making, 3D printing, and the like, that are perfectly appropriate to locate in a commercial area and may in fact benefit from being able to locate closer to their customers. These businesses would be subject to environmental standards to ensure that they're not negatively impacting their neighbors, but we believe that this proposal would make a big difference in allowing New Yorkers to make things and sell them in the same storefront space. Next slide, please. Proposal 4 would expand opportunities for commercial uses above the ground floor. Today, in residential buildings, zoning allows commercial activities on the ground floor, but sometimes restricts these activities from occurring above the ground floor. But we think there's a few instances in which we think it makes sense to allow for commercial uses above the ground floor. First, in lower density commercial areas, you could have a second story that includes a medical office, but if that medical office were to go away, in zoning, there's no way to allow for another kind of office to fill that vacant space. So in these locations, we would allow for second story commercial spaces. In higher density areas, mostly in Manhattan, but also in some limited places like Long Island City and downtown Brooklyn, commercial uses can be above the first and second floor, but you can't allow residences and commercial uses on the same floor in residential buildings. And you also can't allow commercial activities to locate above residences. And so we think that as long as these uses are physically separated, using separate entrances with separate elevators and separate lobbies, mixed use buildings should be able to be built with commercial uses where it makes sense. This is especially useful for things like observation decks, or in thinking about large conversions where different wings of a building with different elevator banks may serve different purposes. Next slide, please. For proposal 5, we want to create new loft-style zoning tools for job-intensive districts for the future. Today, low-density options, physical design rules, and parking make it impossible to build loft-like buildings even in areas where they already exist. This proposal will create a range of new job-intensive zoning districts at a range of densities and heights that expand the zoning toolkit for the future and future rezonings. Next slide, please. On to our second goal. We want to support growing industries by unlocking new space and encouraging new business models. This goal is about addressing ways that zoning might be getting in the way or causing confusion for a particular emerging industry that can help the city accelerate its recovery. Next slide, please. First, we know that life sciences is a growing industry in the city today, and so we want to make sure that our zoning is clear on what kinds of life sciences activities are allowed in commercial areas so that innovative companies can grow without zoning getting in the way. Over the last few years, there's been some confusion as to what kinds of laboratories can locate in commercial areas versus locating in our city's industrial areas. And so our proposal is to make clear that if you're a life sciences business, unless you have the potential for environmental hazards, that you are perfectly appropriate to locate in a commercial area. And we think that this provides more clarity and confidence than exists today. Next slide, please. This proposal is about situations in which a new or growing business is looking to construct a new building, and sometimes they run into small zoning issues that limit the shape of their building. So for example, film studios have struggled with zoning regulations, like the minimum height that a building has to be before it is forced to set back towards the center. To address these kinds of zoning barriers, we're creating a pathway in our zoning, where if a business can locate in a district already, but can't build the form of the building they want, they can appeal to the City Planning Commission for relief from just that zoning restriction. Next slide, please. Third, on nightlife, a few years ago, the City Council removed the discriminatory cabaret laws from the city's administrative code, but zoning still prohibits dancing from occurring in many commercial areas of the city. Now, we would like to get out of the business of having zoning regulate whether you can dance, but the zoning also does strange things. For example, it makes distinctions on whether you can have musical acts that charge a cover or can say what time they're going on, or whether you can have live comedy or open mic nights. Our proposal is to make more common sense reforms to these kinds of regulations that come out of the Prohibition era and allow small venues to operate with dancing or live comedy in the way that they can already operate with live music today in the city's commercial districts. I'll note here that we're keeping in place size restrictions on the business so that you'd only see larger spaces in higher density or industrially zoned areas of the city. Next slide, please. Fourth, the way that our zoning regulates amusements hasn't kept up with things like trampoline parks, virtual skydiving, children's arcades, virtual reality, and it basically restricts most kinds of amusements to the city's industrial areas or to Coney Island. And yet you can look to our neighbors to the north in Westchester or across the Hudson in New Jersey, and you'll find all kinds of fun, family-friendly activities that are allowed in commercial areas. And so what we're proposing here is to simplify and modernize the way that our city's zoning thinks about these kinds of businesses by allowing them indoors and at a small scale in our city's neighborhood commercial corridors, and at a larger scale and more centrally located in higher density areas like Midtown. Next slide, please. We're aware of the state gaming commission's work on casinos, and we're continuing to work with City Hall and the City Council to understand whether there are zoning implications that would need to be addressed to enable this process. More to come on this at a later date. Next slide, please. Finally, under this goal, an arcane part of zoning called enclosure rules sometimes makes it confusing on when a business can have an outdoor component or be allowed to operate indoors. So for example, if you're a florist or a plant shop, it's unclear how much of your business can be on the outdoors part of your lot. And while zoning is clear that you can have outdoor urban agriculture or greenhouses in a commercial area, it's come to our attention that there may be some ambiguity in our zoning as to whether you could do what you would do in a greenhouse, but do it in a completely enclosed building in some commercial areas. And so we want to clarify all this and say that if you're a florist or a plant shop, yes, you can have part of your business be outdoors. And if you want to do indoor agriculture, such as growing hydroponic tomatoes, it's a permitted use in commercial areas. And if someone's able to obtain a license from the state, you can grow cannabis in commercial areas as well. Next slide, please. Each of the proposals under our third goal, fostering vibrant communities, touches on ways we want to enable zoning to increase the access that New Yorkers have to local goods and services. Next slide. So first, outside of our commercial corridors, there are thousands of storefronts and other commercial businesses that dot our city's residential areas. And these businesses provide vital access to local goods and services for people who might live further away from the nearest commercial corridor. But many of these storefronts they predate current zoning, and so they're not allowed under current zoning. And if a storefront business were to go vacant for more than 2 years, in many residential areas of the city, there is no path in our zoning to reoccupy this empty commercial space. And so it would have to remain vacant. And we think this is a clear contributor to storefront vacancy. And so we'd like to remove that 2-year time clock and allow vacant storefronts to become reoccupied. Next slide, please. But there are many parts of the city where we don't have a commercial overlay or a commercial district. And so there's no path in zoning other than a full area-wide rezoning to allow for new neighborhood serving storefronts to locate. So what we're proposing here is to create a new corner store designation where basically within 100 feet of an intersection, or if it's a large-scale development site, such as a NYCHA campus, you could apply to the City Planning Commission to create new locally serving commercial space. Next slide, please. Our zoning today allows for a wide range of home businesses, but there are specific types of businesses that are not allowed to operate in the home. So for example, today you could be a lawyer or a music teacher and regularly have clients visit you in your home, but you couldn't be a barber or an interior designer. And we want to remove these inequities and update our regulations for home businesses to allow for a wider range of home-based businesses, provided that you're still being a good neighbor, such as not having exterior signage, abiding by the existing noise and environmental rules, and not selling items that were not produced on site. Next slide, please. We have special streetscape rules that have been put in place in many special districts and rezonings that the city has done over the last 60 years, but vast parts of the city have no rules whatsoever to prevent the kinds of buildings that don't contribute to economic vibrancy or simply unpleasant or even unsafe for passing residents. Now, this approach has created a patchwork of differing sets of regulations that are too often confusing, inconsistent, or difficult for businesses to understand. And so what we want to do here is create a consistent and easy to understand baseline set of rules for commercial floor ground design, one that is more responsive to areas with greater pedestrian activity, and one that is more relaxed in the city's more auto-oriented commercial corridors. Next slide, please. Finally, under this goal, our zoning today has outdated and difficult to understand regulations around small-scale wholesale and storage businesses. And our current zoning makes it difficult to facilitate neighborhood-based hubs for safe and sustainable deliveries that we might want to see in the future. So what we would do here is we would clarify that small-scale wholesale and storage businesses are permitted in commercial areas, while ensuring that these spaces contribute to the vibrancy of their surrounding businesses through rules part of our streetscape proposal that would ensure transparent windows in areas with greater pedestrian activity. Next slide, please. So our fourth and our final goal is about modernizing and clarifying the rules that we have in zoning about use, or the kinds of activities that zoning allows in a particular location. Next slide, please. In most cases, our zoning rules are more than 60 years old and have not been updated to reflect changes in business practices or how the economy has evolved over time. And so the regulations that we have are full of antiquated and confusing terms that add up to make it harder for small businesses to know where they can locate and what they can do in their space. For example, our zoning is very clear on where telegraph offices are allowed to locate, but it's a lot less clear on where a cell phone repair shop can go. So we're doing three things here to make it easier for small businesses, city agencies, and the general public to better understand this particularly unclear and outdated part of our zoning resolution. First, we are reorganizing the categories of uses we have in zoning, called use groups, into more coherent categories based on similar business sector and building type, such as retail and service, offices, places of assembly, and manufacturing. At the same time, we're modernizing the definitions that we have in our zoning for retail, services, and manufacturing uses, so they better align with the city's current economy. We believe this will make it easier for businesses, agencies like the Department of Buildings, and New Yorkers to understand where businesses can locate. Third, in some special districts, use definitions like typewriter repair and other kinds of uses are especially antiquated. And so we want to update these terms as well as our sets of rules so they all fit together in ways that are easier for businesses to understand. Now, I want to emphasize here that this part of the proposal will not make any changes to where a particular kind of business is allowed to locate, but it's all about clarity and modernizing the terms we have in our zoning for classifying businesses. Next slide, please. Our last proposal is about modernizing our city's loading rules for existing buildings. Today, if a building tenant wants to change from offices to one of the maker spaces or other small clean manufacturing businesses I mentioned earlier in the proposal, they would not be required to change the amount of parking they have to provide in our zoning, but they may trigger a rule for additional loading docks. Now, this may require the prospective tenant to have to cut an additional loading dock or two into the side of the building just to be able to occupy a space, regardless of how much loading the tenant might want or need. So adding additional unnecessary loading docks might be too expensive or simply not feasible for the building they're looking to occupy. And all of this could result in more vacancy or underutilized space, or a business not being able to find a space that meets their needs. And so what we want to do here is we want to enable adaptive reuse of existing buildings by not requiring additional loading for a change of use in an existing building. New buildings would still have to add a number of loading docks appropriate, though, to the proposed mix of uses in that building. Next slide, please. So we're spending the summer getting in front of as many audiences as we can, presenting our ideas for solutions to the problems that businesses are facing today, and soliciting your feedback and your questions about the proposal. After Labor Day, we're going to have 2 more public information sessions before entering into the formal public review process later this fall. And then later this fall, we'll be in front of every community board in the city, and this process will culminate in a city council vote sometime next spring. With that, thank you for your time this evening and for joining us, and we'd welcome questions that you might have. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate all the information that you just shared in this great presentation. This presentation will be available on our website, hopefully tomorrow, but certainly by Thursday. And our past presentation, which was exactly the same presentation, is already up on our website that you can find, and we'll make sure we drop the link into the chat for you on that. So with that, we're going to turn to questions. And let me just get my instructions again, just to help you answer questions. Or ask questions. So as a reminder, you can ask questions in the Q&A chat and continue writing to us there if that's what makes it easier for you and you're more comfortable to do. You can also you raise your hand, and to do that, you can either click on the Zoom button at the bottom of your right-hand screen that says raise hand. If you are on the phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand, and we'll use the last 4 digits of your phone number to call you out, and staff will unmute you. So with that, I will go to our questions. I don't see any raised hands yet, so I'm going to go to the questions that, hold on, maybe I do. I'm going to go to the questions in the chat that were populated during the presentation. So Matt, the first question is based off of commercial rent control. So couldn't a lot of these issues be solved if we were able to look at commercial rent control as an option?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So this proposal is about allowing businesses to locate in more locations, which has a similar goal of making it more affordable to open and operate a business in New York City.
Appreciate that. So the next question is, why didn't you do outreach to workers and community members first? You would have had very different assumptions, I think that is. I can answer this question if you don't mind, Matt. So the team has already spoken with hundreds of New Yorkers, including many of the community boards that are on the call today, and held 3 prior public info sessions. We're excited to continue tonight with the info session for the 4th info session, and we'll be continuing to make ourselves available with our community boards, local organizations, business groups, and through more info sessions in the fall. If you'd like to get more involved, please feel free to reach out to us through our email address, which is economicopportunity@planning.nyc.gov. On our website, you can also sign up for a newsletter that can keep you informed of meetings and information sharing that we'll be doing. I'm going to go to question number 3. Matt, as for nightlife bars, is the mayor letting up on adult use bars, also providing that they meet the state liquor requirements?
Thanks for the question, Robert. So this proposal would not affect regulations for adult uses, which are only permitted in limited locations in the city today. Enforcement of the city's rules on adult uses is coordinated closely between the NYPD and the Mayor's Office of Special Enforcement.
Thank you, Matt. I do want to, I see some hands raised, so I do want to head to that. I can't see exactly, but if we could promote the next person. Is it Alicia Boyd?
Yes, we'll promote and she will rejoin as a panelist.
Thank you.
Alicia, you should be able to turn on your camera and mic. It may be taking a moment for her to transition. Alicia, I see. There we go. I think we have you.
Hello,
Alicia? Yeah, hi, it's good to hear from you.
it's Alicia.
Alicia, thank you.
Okay. You talked about the environmental standards for clean manufacturing and assuring the community that there will be some environmental standards imposed. Who will be actually monitoring the environmental standards? How will these standards be applied? Do you have a list of industries that you feel would actually be a clean manufacturing, or is this up to the business owner to decide whether or not they are a clean manufacturing, and some external entity then determining whether or not it is in fact environmentally safe for the community?
Thank you for your question, Alicia. So these businesses, just like any business in the city today, would have to abide by air quality and noise standards in particular set by the Department of Environmental Protection. So they are the main enforcement agency, and they would be under this proposal as well.
Thank you. Let's go to the next raised hand, Frank Morano.
We're promoting now.
Thank you.
Frank, you may have received a error message saying you're being promoted. If you click on it, you'll be able to become a panelist and turn on your. Oh. I think we may have lost him.
Okay, if you can just keep your eye out and make sure that if you see him back in the Zoom, or
Sure.
if we get back in touch with him, we can get him online to get the question.
Sure. Oh,
Go
wait,
to
wait,
the-
wait. He's here.
Thank you.
Frank, you should be able to turn on your microphone and your camera if you wish.
Camera?
Yes, I think we can hear you.
We
I
can hear
can't
you.
see me though. You don't have to see me, I guess. My question is this. Basically, in a residential area, residentially zoned neighborhood, you're saying that you're going to allow a commercial establishment to exist on a corner. And I have a major problem with that, because people who buy homes in residential neighborhoods, purely residential neighborhoods, want it residential, don't want commercial establishments in their community. And I think also that if you put a commercial establishment on the corner, you are setting up a situation where somebody can now ask for a commercial establishment on adjacent piece of property, get a variance, go to Board of Standards and Appeals and say, hey, listen, character to the community already is commercial. You have a commercial establishment on the corner. So I think the residential neighborhoods have to be protected, and something like that should not be allowed.
Thanks for your question, Frank, and it gives me an opportunity to clarify our proposal. So there are many residential areas of the city that are far from commercial services. What this proposal does is it creates an opportunity for new businesses to better serve those areas only if they receive approval of the City Planning Commission. So this is a discretionary process. It would not be new businesses appearing on corners without opportunity for folks like yourself to weigh in. So I want to be clear on that.
So in other words, it's another way for a commercial establishment to enter a purely residential community. That's what you're setting up. And you are therefore setting up a situation where you will be changing the character of residential neighborhoods.
Any business that would like to use this new zoning tool would go through a discretionary process. So there would be opportunities for community input at that time.
I see. In other words, you're screwing residential neighbors. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So why don't we take one more hand raised, and we can go back to some of the questions in the Q&A function. Sue-Ann?
Hi. Okay, thank you. I have a few quick questions. With regards to permitting small-scale manufacturing in neighborhood commercial districts, how are you defining small scale? When you're in terms of permitting commercial uses on second stories, what types of commercial uses are you looking at permitting, which use groups, et cetera? In terms of allowing bulk relief, and also with respect to the last question that was asked, why are you looking for the CPC to be giving special permission rather than either a rezoning process or a BSA process? And when you say that you would allow nightlife to locate in appropriate areas, what are you considering to be appropriate locations? And finally, with respect to commercial uses that will be allowed to have outdoor components, Which commercial uses are you talking about? I know, for example, that florists are already allowed to have stoop line licenses to sell directly outside their store. Sorry if that's a lot, but if you can try
Give
to
us-
get some of them.
Yeah. I
For
think
sure,
I
let's-
got
let's
them. But if I
well,
missed one of them, let me know.
that, just in case we missed something.
Yeah.
Go for
Feel free. I'll try and do a quick response to each of them. So on small scale manufacturing, we're looking into what the threshold would be, but generally our idea is that it would fit into an existing standard storefront space. So when you think about your standard 25 or 50-foot storefront, that's kind of the size we're meaning here. Truly small scale, fitting within a neighborhood commercial corridor. In terms of commercial uses permitted on second floors, the idea is that it would be the same uses that would be permitted on the ground floor, generally speaking. On bulk relief, I'm sorry, I didn't catch the nature of it, so I'll come back to that last. On the corner stores, why CPC and not BSA or rezoning? The short answer is we want this to be accessible to small mom and pop shops or other small businesses. And we believe that the CPC is a good happy medium in between, so that a full BSA might be too expensive or take too long for a corner store type business. And a full rezoning is not appropriate for a particular small corner of an intersection. Typically, our agency doesn't do a rezoning of that scale. The rezonings that we do are a much larger scale and thinking about a neighborhood context, not a particular corner. So that's kind of why CPC. Dancing in appropriate areas. So our idea here is to use the existing regulations around eating and drinking establishments and how they permit live music today. So today in our zoning, you can have eating and drinking establishments under 200-person capacity. So this is again, roughly a 25-foot standard storefront size. They can have live music today in pretty much every commercial district of the city. And so we would allow the places where you would have live music to have live music with dancing today. From our perspective, it doesn't make any sense that you can have live music, you can have a band, but the moment people start moving to that music, suddenly you're in violation of zoning. To us, that doesn't make sense. And we think it's appropriate to allow for dancing in places where you have live music. And then lastly, on florists or other outdoors, yes, you can have stoop line licenses. What we're talking about here is the ambiguity in our zoning about whether you can have inside your zoning lot operating on the outdoor parts of your zoning lot. So it's different than the stoop line license for florists. And
Meaning the backyard,
forgive me on the
something like that.
Exactly. So we want to provide that clarity because for some reason, 60 years ago, the people who wrote the zoning resolution missed that particular use.
Okay, and with respect to the bulk relief, my question is why a CPC permission versus BSA? BSA seems like the classic case for the BSA, right?
Yeah,
bulk
so this
relief for like the sound stages or whatever.
The reason for the CPC is, generally speaking, these are businesses that can already locate in these districts today, and they can already build a building that fits the density of the district they're proposing. So they don't need a variance on density. What they do need is relief on a very limited part of zoning related to the shape of the building. So in our minds, that's more appropriate for something like CPC rather than going to the BSA. But I appreciate the feedback on that.
The shape of the building meaning what, like setbacks or?
Setbacks or rear yards, things that are not density related and not use related, but ones that really govern the physical shape of that building within the density allowed under that zoning district.
And so this would be only in relation to commercial only districts, not mixed use districts.
We would allow this in commercial or M districts.
Okay. But not residence districts with a commercial overlay.
I'm not sure if I'm following, so I think it might be best if you have a specific.
Okay, yeah, we can
use in
follow up by
mind.
email. Thanks.
Please do. Thank you. Appreciate your questions.
Thank you, Suen. We have a lot of great questions in the chat, so I want to make sure that we're giving equal time to that. So I'm going to move back into the questions in the Q&A. Matt, so this question is, would we, through this proposal, would we allow business to operate in a residential zone, whether in a house or a corner store?
Yeah, so businesses today can currently operate as a home occupation in a residential zone or a home. So this proposal would make modest changes to expand the type of home occupations, and new commercial businesses could apply to city planning to open up a store in limited locations in residence districts, as I touched on earlier.
Okay, thank you. So the next question I'm going to go to is in reference to proposal 5, which is about new job intensive zoning districts. So the question is, can you provide further details on this proposal and what will be included in the new job intensive zoning district tools?
Mm-hmm. So these districts, they provide higher density job districts than generally exist today. So today, the vast majority of manufacturing districts are capped at 2 FAR. And so these new districts would create a range of new tools at higher FARs that could be included, would include also updated physical rules that would allow for new buildings to be constructed in industrial areas.
Great. Moving into the next question, where can we find a list of two-year vacancy properties and locations?
Yeah, great question. So the data is not tracked to our knowledge, but it's determined by the Department of Buildings on a case-by-case basis.
And then a question just about the parking mandate. Will any parking mandates be relaxed or eliminated through this proposal?
Not as part of this proposal. I'll note, though, that we're taking a look at this a little bit more closely as part of the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity proposal. So more to come on that later this year.
Okay, great. And then this is more of just a technical question of just like, where can we find the actual regulations at this time?
Yeah. It's a great question, and it's also an opportunity for us to emphasize something that we're doing in this initiative and in the City of Yes. So we are still a few months away from having the proposed zoning text. And we're doing that intentionally because we want to gather as much feedback as we can on this proposal through info sessions like this and reaching as many New Yorkers as we possibly can over the coming months. So we don't have regulations to share with you tonight. We will when we enter into public review later this fall. And of course, you can always find our existing zoning resolution on DCP's website.
Okay, great. And now somebody's asking about just wanting examples of what an upzoning commercial zone or changes to manufacturing zones would look like.
Yeah, so sure. So this proposal would not include any upzonings. So to the extent that we're creating new zoning tools, they would be for the use in future geographically specific rezonings. So think about this as we're making new paintbrushes, but the actual painting would happen through other neighborhood processes that the department initiates later on.
Thank you for those 2 examples. I wanted to go back to a question that I just realized I missed, was that looking at proposal 8, which is about the nightlife. Just thinking about how does the DCP think that modifying the zoning resolution will change the conduct of the state liquor license and the community boards, if there's going to be any difference there. This is also shown with experience with live music. Liquor license explicitly disallow live music in thousands of venues, although live music is allowed as of right, and specifically in the zoning resolution use groups 6 and 12. And somebody just wants to hear a little bit more about what will resolve the issues for dancing regulations.
Yeah. So thank you for raising this. And as the question suggests, zoning is just one part of a complex regulatory picture that businesses face in the city today. And so with regard to dancing, the proposal looks to alleviate this one barrier, which is zoning, by removing dancing restrictions imposed on bars and restaurants, many of which create an arbitrary prohibition on social dancing. But businesses will still need to work through the process with the state liquor authority, and in some cases amend their licenses if they currently prohibit dancing.
Thank you, Matt. So I want to give equal time, so I'm going to go back over to people who have their hands raised. Team, the next person has is dialed in with an ending number of 512.
We have a dial-in participant. The last 3 digits are 5112. That's 5112. If you press star 6, it should unmute your there we go. One moment. If you press star 6, it should unmute your microphone. Oh, you had it for a moment. If you
Say it
just
again,
press star,
Tom.
if you press star 6. Oh, we have you.
Hello? Okay, yes. Thank you for taking my question. Your presentation, you relayed that all or most of your outreach resulted in everyone in agreement. Was there in fact anyone in disagreement? Having said that, the retail business corridors have a proliferation of for rent signs, as you mentioned, subsequent to higher rents generated from gentrification. All of the businesses on the retail corridor of my home of 40 years in a community that is already dense, that I have patronized, have communicated that simply the rent is too high. No one talked about, no owners talked about zoning impediments or process. They clearly, in my informal outreach and communications with them, are concerned about the high rents. And to also, I would like to ask you, you say that your proposal for cabaret dancing, you want to eliminate the impediment, allow dancing. No, I agree with the gentleman that say this is a residential community. Yes, we have a corridor that is highly frequented in a commercial corridor, but there's residents that live there. Long-standing, this is a community raising children. We already have a proliferation of illegal smoke shops, and now you're saying, oh, if they have live music, then what's the difference of dancing? There's a huge difference. 2 total different animals, because we're going to have more double parking, more of an increase in crime, more garbage. And again, in a 2-block radius in my community, which is a highly trafficked commercial corridor, all of the for rent signs and the owners that I spoke to left because the rents were too high. Your response. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your experiences and speaking with your neighbors and other businesses. We know that rent is high in New York City, and zoning is one of those kinds of things that's often a hidden barrier, or businesses only discover that they're running not in accordance with zoning when DOB comes knocking or someone else tells them that they're in violation of zoning. And so oftentimes zoning is one of those things that we've heard in our outreach is something that is either creating a chilling effect and making it hard for new kinds of businesses to occupy these vacant storefront spaces, or is creating a situation in which a building is getting subject with fines because they didn't know what the rules were, and the rules weren't clear to them when they decided to sign that lease. So we want to address both things, both the barriers to new businesses coming in, as well as making the rules more clear so that businesses are able to thrive. So I thank you for your questions.
But what about the long-standing businesses that have been operating for years, 20 plus years, and we're doing well, and we're much needed in the neighborhoods, and we miss them? There are for rent signs because they can't afford the rent. Again, I took an informal outreach and talked to them. I've been here 40 years in this very dense community, and it is a community. It is not. We are raising children. We do not want cabarets with dancing. That is the last thing we need. Absolute last thing. And again, no one talked to, I understand your point, and it's well taken for new businesses. But in certain black and brown and small business areas, that is not the concern at all. And these are businesses that the community and residents depended on and needed, and they are now gone.
Yeah.
So to do the same thing over and over and expect a different result, we don't want to do. We've seen other communities and what has happened. And again, thank you for listening. And I still want your question in that you're saying that everybody agreed. Everybody agreed in your outreach? All the TVs, everybody agreed?
We're still in the process of gathering our outreach. So I think your feedback and your experiences are well taken, and we appreciate your
thank you
attending this evening.
And add. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to another hand raised, Efren Gonzalez.
A friend is being promoted.
Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Welcome.
Okay. My concern is what I heard about when you mentioned cannabis, and then I'm hearing about cabaret, and then I'm hearing the fact that what I didn't hear, and that is the impact not only on the residents, but also nearby school zones. I mean, from what I listened to, it is quite possible that a commercial property could be built where one of the tenants could be growing cannabis if they wanted, and then next door there could be an adult bar establishment. I didn't hear anything about parking. I didn't hear anything about the impact of the environment for the nearby community. And you know, some people do have an open mind, but you got to be realistic. If we're going to increase the capacity where that there are going to be accessibilities given to businesses, that has to be addressed. The impact on the community, the safety. I don't want people that live in a residential community right next to where I work, where they're not going to be able to park their cars because an establishment that is open till 4 o'clock under the SLL rules, they can, that they're not going to have access to parking when they get out of work, let's say at midnight. This is a 24-hour city, and we understand that a residential community is different when someone leaves and somebody comes home. So that is a concern. As it is, the infiltration of smoke shops, illegal smoke shops, this is probably going to add to it. And even though maybe there's a strip there, I would say on Stillwell Avenue, but it will still impact the nearby residential. And also there's a college and there's a hospital. So I don't know if in that particular area that's going to be good. I mean, you know, what for me to say one or two might be okay, but the way I'm hearing this proposal and the way developers think, and the fact that there are developers that don't even use city money, they'll just build, and they don't have to go through a community board process. This to me will be very dangerous. It's going to set a precedent where businesses are going to come in, and some of them may not even, they're going to occupy, buildings are going to go up, and the people who are going to get hurt are the people who live in the community right next to these properties. If it's on the corner, but if that whole block encompasses homes, 2 or 3 family homes, that's where my concern is. What about children that are going to be walking the community? And there's going to be, there could be an adult striptease establishment, cabaret, cannabis. It's scary. So I wanted to make it clear that this is not something, and usually when we do changes, it's usually in areas where nobody lives. And I know that they say that we don't have those types of properties anymore. Areas, we do. I just don't think that it's good next to a residential community, which is zoned for 2 family homes, single family homes. Some of them were built in the 1930s. And then, things have changed. So can you just let me know and let the public know the issue of greenhouse and somebody somebody could have a bar and then upstairs they can grow cannabis. From what I heard, I mean, it's possible, depending, and then the commercial property, the loading. Commercial vehicles really are not allowed on city streets after 9 p.m. But to me, that is concerning, depending if it's built up in a way where that it will just impact the traffic. Is there feasible studies that are done on the environmental impact? Because there are people that use public transportation, and there are people that occasionally ride a bike. But to have trucks and loading zones, and so didn't hear anything about the parking, but I'd like to hear more about that.
Great.
Thank you.
Yes. Matt, do you want to address the parking?
Sure. So commercial parking is not a part of this proposal. We're not planning to do anything that would either diminish or increase parking for a particular business, because this proposal, it's all about filling empty space or underused space. And so there are a few things that I want to make sure that I have a chance to clarify, and I can hear the concern in your voice. And so I want to make sure we're clear that when it comes to things like eating and drinking establishments, they're allowed in every commercial district of the city today. And we're not changing anything to where bars or restaurants are permitted to locate. We're just allowing their patrons to dance in the way that their patrons can already listen to live music and live bands today. And I also want to be clear that the State Liquor Authority is still going to review liquor licenses with community board input. And so zoning is one part of the equation here, but there are many, many other parts of the equation that add up to ensure that there are good neighbors and that there are safeguards put in place for communities. So I can hear that concern in your voice, and so I want to make sure I address that. And on cannabis, I also want to be clear that the state is going through a process of licensing, and only cultivators that have that license from the state will be allowed under the city zoning to do that cultivation commercially. So I also want to be clear on that. And then lastly, on loading, I didn't want to make sure that I missed this part. So on loading, for new businesses, we would just make sure that the loading requirements, they stay as is, so that you would add for a new building, there would be loading that would be appropriate to the amount of the mix of businesses in that building. But for existing businesses, we've heard a number of different instances in which the loading requirement is precisely what prevents that business from being able to move in and occupy that vacant space. So as you can tell, each of these proposals, while we're trying to take a considered and thoughtful approach and making one that is balancing the concerns we've heard from small businesses who are members of their neighborhoods with the residents and the other businesses that surround them. So thank you for your questions and for your thoughts this evening.
And we'll keep working on that. I want to go to Roxanne Delgado. I noticed you also asked a question in the Q&A about the city allowed homeless shelters in certain commercial districts that actually hurts commercial districts. Will this change? So just wanted to preface that I want to acknowledge that I saw your in the chat as well. But if we can promote Roxanne.
You should be rejoining as a panelist momentarily.
Yes, thank you so much. I had to agree with some of the speakers regarding the mom and pop stores. As a Friends of Pelham Parkway community group, we have lost so many mom and pop shops due to rising rents. Recently, the Rainbow Diner was open almost 50 years, but unfortunately, they didn't make the 50th anniversary due to rising rents. Right. So my concern is if you're going to open, and I saw you use two terms, small businesses and mom and pops. But small businesses can be between 100 to 250 employees. If you're to open up the residential areas to commercial use, can it be restricted to small mom and pops where there's 20 or less employees? Because I have no problems helping mom and pop shops, but I'm not here to help. I mean, small businesses are basically, depending on who defines it, can be up to 250 employees. So I would like you to consider a restriction if you proceed with the opening up residential areas to commercial uses. And yes, I did answer that question because City Council did approve to allow certain, I think C5 and above to be used as temporary housing, which includes homeless shelters. And I found in recent incident where homeless shelters were open in the commercial corridors on White Plains Road, it will have provided a negative impact because, I mean, I'm not against homeless people. I mean, anyone could be homeless, especially in the Bronx. But they will have be loitering around commercial areas. We do have aggressive panhandling right now from mostly unhoused men. So I'm not sure if you could look into that issue because I don't think having a homeless shelter in the middle of a driving business corridor really helps mom and pop shops or small businesses. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for your questions. Go ahead, Lara.
I just said thank you. I'm just going to pass it over to you.
Thank you. So on the second part of your question, the proposal is not planning to affect the city's shelter policies, but on your question about mom and pops, zoning doesn't have good mechanisms for regulating the kinds of businesses that come in. What we do have are mechanisms for regulating the space that these businesses take up. So you're right to point out that the state and the federal government have a pretty wide band of what they mean to be a small business. And in fact, I believe the federal government goes up to 500 employees. So it's even more expansive than what the state says. But I want to be clear that what we're proposing for the corner store initiative is one that is strictly speaking for very small spaces. And we're thinking that it's going to be something like a typical storefront space. So these spaces are to be restricted on size. And in restricting them based on size, you're not going to have businesses with 500 employees operating out of a small storefront. You just won't. You do not see that in the city today. And so that's the way we're planning to propose it. And again, I want to say that we're not allowing these commercial uses as of right. It's going through a discretionary process that will involve environmental assessment and will involve input from the community as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. There's a lot of questions in the chat, so I'm gonna start going through those a little bit more. What's to stop an owner from starting out with proposal that avoids need for loading docks, then changing to use that as significant deliveries, causing difficulty to other tenants and neighbors? You addressed this a little bit, but if you could just reassure about the loading docks, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, so any new construction building today triggers the need for additional loading docks. So this proposal won't change that. And this proposal is about allowing previously existing buildings to access new tenants.
Great, thank you. Thank you for restating that for us. This one's particularly about R3 and R3 and R4 residential zoning designations and jeopardy for higher density builds. I'm not positive if this is related to commercial manufacturing districts, but if you have any thoughts on that comment.
Yeah, I want to take this as a moment to clarify that this proposal is not changing densities in residence districts, period. It is focused on commercial and manufacturing areas.
Thank you. My screen jumping. This is another clarifying question about the Board of Standards and Appeals and the City Planning Commission. The proposal presented tonight, at what point will zoning variances need to be reviewed and approved by the Board of Standards Appeals, which is the BSA, rather than the City Planning Commission, the CPC?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So we're looking at special permits issued by the BSA and CPC, and we're modernizing them in step with these proposals. We're not looking to change the variance process as currently resides with the BSA, though.
Okay. Thank you for that. And just again, with just procedural, like, please clarify the timeline. Does DCP anticipate certifying this proposal in the fall, or referring it to the public review in the fall? And when will the 60-day clock begin to tick on that?
Yeah, so we plan to refer this proposal to the public in early October. So that's what begins that 60-day clock.
Great. This is a one we haven't quite heard of yet, but you had mentioned in your PowerPoint. What type of commercial use is permitting on the second floors?
Yeah, I touched on this earlier, so I just want to make sure I'm touching on it again, that we would allow for the same commercial uses that are permitted on the ground floor to occupy the second floor, whereas today it's only medical offices and educational facilities, what we would consider to be community facilities. So we want to allow for other kinds of offices to occupy that space as well.
That's great. Thank you for clarifying that. There's a question that's interesting about a small business development center. This is could be something that's like a program for one of our partner agencies, but is there any support for businesses that want to discuss compliance and leverage the new zoning? And would that be a small business development center involved in that?
Yeah, it's a great point and great question. So we're currently working with business improvement districts very closely in the Small Business Services Agency. And we're continuing to do so, but I think if you have ideas, would love to hear from you on this, as well as reaching out to your local bid or industrial service provider or any kind of business services provider. If you don't have one, then I think reaching out to SBS directly, but we're also happy to put you in touch. So I thank you for raising that. It's a great idea.
Thank you. Still have quite a few. I just want to mention to do a time check. We're at 8:20. We have a lot of questions in the chat. We will definitely make sure that if we don't get to all of them this evening, that we fully address them in other settings, and we'll connect with you through our email addresses. But Matt, I'm going to go to one that's talking about proposal 10, which is the casino proposal. When will we know more about that?
Yeah, we don't have a date that we can offer tonight, but we anticipate being able to share more details publicly prior to the fall referral.
Thank you. Let's do a few more. Here's one. We have experienced bakeries that contain a wholesale component have needed for truck parking that have negatively impacted neighboring businesses. Can you expand? Expanding this will use group as of right is a concern. Can you just talk a little bit about truck impact and how that might work with, for example, a bakery who may be doing some wholesale component on their in their business?
Sure. So the proposal will be limited to small scale production uses that would not be expected to have a greater loading need than the already existing retail or other uses that are widely permitted on our commercial streets today.
So it'd be like in use for within the store.
Well, exactly. In our research and in studying this, what we've found is that our retail and service uses that already are allowed on our commercial streets today, whether they're bakeries or other kinds of retail uses, they have the same type of loading and distribution profile as other kinds of spaces. That the trucking is more based on the size of the business scale in terms of square footage rather than the use within it.
Thank you for clarifying. The next question is about storage and delivery in C16 zones, which is a commercial zone. Will they be by permit only? If so, which agency would be responsible for issuing the permits for delivery and storage?
Yeah. So the proposal would allow for small scale micro fulfillment centers in C1 and C2 districts. If it's a larger facility, it would continue to locate in a non-residential district.
Thanks. I'm going to go down to, I guess there was a follow-up question with large warehouses. Will they still be allowed in M1, M3 zones?
Yeah, so I guess related to part two, I can see why it's a second question. This project is not going to change large warehouse regulations, but we're aware of concerns from some communities, and we'll note that a private application addressing this issue is currently being reviewed by the department.
Yep. And just a reminder that we're still working on the proposal, and the zoning resolution text amendments will be available as we enter into the public review process, but we'll continue to be having these sessions and having conversations with the public and organizations going forward. And so the next question is, with respect to this initiative's planning, would there be any regulations proposed or any kind of financial cap based on the mixed use?
I think, could you repeat that question actually? So I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what this means. So maybe we'll come back to it. But the question was, would there be any regulations proposed or any kind of financial cap on the mixed use?
Yeah, I welcome the person who wrote that to clarify in the chat a little bit more detail, but I do want to note here, though, that we're working closely with our colleagues at the Economic Development Corporation and the Small Business Services Agency to think more about how these changes in zoning align well with financial supports that they have for small businesses. So I hope that at least maybe partially answers your question, and we'd welcome a follow-up.
Okay. Here we go to, sorry, there's a lot of great questions here. So I'm just trying to make sure that considering how late it is getting to the evening, that we at least hear about different types of questions. But what can you tell, if anything, about the housing opportunity text amendment?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not the expert on the economic opportunity text amendment or the housing opportunity text amendment. That's our my colleagues can speak more on that. So our focus tonight is on economic opportunity. There will be future information sessions on the housing opportunity initiative. So to receive updates on housing opportunity text amendment, please send an email to housingopportunity@planning.nyc.gov or sign up for our City of Yes newsletter on the City of Yes page on DCP's website. But appreciate your interest in learning more about that initiative.
Okay, I think we have one more dial in. If we can go to that, I'm going to make sure that we get that person on the phone. So 086 is all I can see. I'm not sure what you can see on your end.
Yes, the person whose number ends with 086. Oh, you're unmuted.
I just wanted to make a couple of statements because this is supposed to be also feedback from the community. I think it's very disingenuous of the Department of City Planning to make the statement that the reason why they're doing this is because of all of the empty storefronts, when we know and we've watched the reason why the storefronts have been vacated is because of the high rents of those storefronts. And there's been litigation and bill proposals to put some caps on that, and that's been ignored by the City Council as well as our mayor, former mayor, and our current mayor. I also want to state that when we're talking about the reason why zoning exists is so that we don't have a lot of mixed things happening in the neighborhood. The reason why zoning came about was so that there would be a clear understanding of what could happen in a particular community and what could not. The idea that you're now opening up residential communities to commercial spaces is now blurring that real defined division. And as former people have talked about, this is very, very disheartening for you to now insist that at any corner in New York City, in any residential neighborhood, we can now find a commercial spot in that corner that could turn, according to your rules, the new regulation could turn into a bar that opens up to 4 o'clock in the morning with dancing and music. You know, it's very, very disheartening to think that you think that this is a better idea when you are only considering commercial and you're not considering residential. The residential dominates this community. We are the voters of this city, and to start to blur those lines is something that should not happen. Also, another disingenuous statement that you made was that you reached out to community boards and got agreements with them about these proposals, when we know that these proposals were created by a select group of people, including business people, developers, and the mayor and the city, and the community boards were not involved in that discussion. These proposals have been very publicized over the last year and a half since the mayor became the mayor, and now you're bringing it to the community as if there have been input from the community. Well, the input that you're hearing today is basically saying leave the residential corridors alone. We do not want commercial developments on our corridors. We don't care if it's on the corner. And it's also disingenuous for you to say that there was going to be an additional environmental review when we know historically that there's a 99% chance that anybody puts an application in front of DCP to do a rezoning that you have now changed the zoning laws for will be successful. We know that the environmental reviews are just, you know, smoke and mirrors that just happen. So you changing the regulation and then saying, oh, but you just got one more hurdle. Well, yeah, that one more hurdle is going to be a guarantee that we're now going to have commercial property, commercial establishments all on residential neighborhoods all throughout New York City. And the last question, because there is an environmental impact here, are you planning on doing an environmental EIS, an environmental impact statement? Because I believe you should, because this is happening to every corner of New York City, and people need to know what type of environmental impact this is going to have to allow bars staying open to 4 o'clock in the morning with dancing. And yes, I'm a Black person. I know what it's like to go out dancing, and I know what it's like to go to a bar and sit down and drink. There is a difference. It is a different environment. When you go out dancing, it's a much different environment when you're going out to a bar and sitting down and eating food. I'm sorry, you cannot sit there and say that it's the same. Oh, we're just dancing. No, it's a very different environment. You have a lot more noise. You have a lot more cars. You've got a lot more sexual innuendos that happen during a dancing. I'm sorry, these are residential communities that you're now trying to come in and blur the lines of the very distinct zoning that says commercial should not exist on residential properties. And so I would hope that the people on this call would be very, very vigilant and oppose these rezoning proposals and be very loud at their community board and with their elected officials to say that certain of these rezoning proposals should not pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your expressing yourself and letting us know.
But don't forget the question. The question is, are you planning on doing an EIS, environmental impact statement?
Matt, do you want to address the environmental review?
Sure. So we're currently undergoing an environmental review process and plan to make the results of that public, along with the entering into public review later this fall. It's our understanding that this will be an environmental assessment, an EAS. And so you will be able to read the details of that as when that becomes public in a few months.
Okay. There's still so many questions in the chat, so I just want to get back to that. I'm going to move to some ones that are kind of newer topics. What support in terms of data or phone support do you have for brokers who align with your goal and want to help these spaces for you?
A great question. We'd be happy to hear from more folks that are trying to fill empty storefront space or any stakeholders in general. So please email us and reach out.
Thank you. Are there statistics to support why storefronts are empty, as expensive rents seem to be the main problem at this point? And we're hearing that loud and clear.
We've done a lot of research on this topic over the years, and you can find a few reports on our website about retail health. Now, there's not one single reason for storefront vacancy, and we know that the pandemic greatly increased it as many businesses couldn't make it through economic shocks. Many others are still recovering from the pandemic. We believe that zoning plays a role for all the reasons that I've described tonight, because some businesses may just not be allowed to occupy a particular space, or it's unclear that they can be. And in regard to the last caller, one of our goals for this initiative is to create more clarity in our zoning, simply because in so many instances, our zoning is unclear today. I mentioned the example that you can have telegraph offices or typewriter repair. These are clearly specified uses in our zoning, but it's not cell phone repair. Our zoning is 60 years old. It has not kept up with the way that business practices have changed. It's not kept up with the way that city's economy has evolved. And in so many different ways, it's just making things unclear for businesses on where they can go. And this is directly leading to storefront vacancy. So it's one factor that is contributing. Others are that they can't expand due to zoning, or they otherwise need to change their business to fit a space. And so these are just some ways in which the complexity of our zoning makes New York City less friendly to small businesses and folks who want to start a new business or locate a business along a storefront. And it contributes to driving up the cost of locating.
Okay, just going to keep going down. This is actually focused on the life sciences component, which you haven't heard many questions about yet. So I want to make sure that we get that in. Can you define what kind of work life sciences encompasses? Are there zoning regulations in place for such businesses now? And what is different with your approach? Does this mean wet labs handling chemicals, or possibly microbes can be in regular office or nondescript buildings? Can you just give a little bit more about the definition of life sciences and how that will work?
Sure. So life sciences today, there is no single definition for life sciences. Life sciences is an industry or a range of industries. It's everything from new kinds of sustainable products or laboratory grown meats. It could be new types of beauty and health products. It could be new kinds of vaccines or therapeutics. It could be new kinds of 3D printed prosthetics. There's a whole wide range of what life sciences is. But the way that zoning thinks about life sciences is very narrowly defined today. And unsurprisingly, it's a few decades behind the times. And so the way our zoning thinks about life sciences, it refers to laboratories. And so there are two versions of laboratories in our zoning. There's one that is for our commercial areas and one for our industrial areas. And our interpretation of this distinction is that the industrial areas are where you would have the potential for environmental hazards. And in the commercial areas, you would not have that potential for environmental hazards. And so that is the distinction that we believe is true in our zoning, but we need to provide some more clarity to that effect because there is some confusion as to whether you can have some kinds of those life sciences activities I mentioned today, whether those constitute commercial labs or whether those constitute another kind of laboratory. So we want to provide that clarity while also ensuring that that the kind of environmental hazards that might be possible with these kind of businesses really are placed in our industrial areas that are far from residences.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So there's a question about the urban design proposals. And have any of the CPTED, and let me just make sure I have it right of what that stands for, crime prevention through environmental design. Any of the urban design proposals have been considered to address the rise of street crime, smash and grab theft, shoplifting, and homelessness within certain commercial districts, corridors, and community boards in the city?
Yeah. Thanks for this question. So there's a number of mayoral initiatives that focus on crime much more directly, but we in zoning believe that we can play a role in trying to keep our commercial streets feeling active. So some of you might be familiar with the classic Jacobs eyes on the street idea, that the more businesses and activity you have, it can help make an area feel safe. And so by helping more businesses locate along our commercial corridors, along with these proposed streetscape rules, we think that we can help make our corridors maintain a feeling of safety.
Okay, great. I'm skimming through some more of these. I do see, I think we have another hand up. Alicia, I believe your hand's still up again, or maybe that was left up. If we can promote and just make sure.
We'll promote momentarily. Alicia, it's registering that you declined the promotion. I can unmute you in the attendees column.
I think. Why don't, Alicia, if you can just put into the chat if you have a question that you're looking to ask. Can we maybe go to Sue-Lin and make sure that it's not if it's a new question or if it's a hand that's been raised and hasn't been put down yet.
Sue-Lin's rejoining as a panelist.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I wanted to address the issue of timeline. It sounds like community boards only have until October to comment on this. A lot of us haven't even gotten through the first part of City of Yes, the zoning for zero carbon. And this is also a fairly lengthy text amendment with 18 proposals. So we essentially only have 2 months from September. Our community board has a lot of religious holidays in September and October. And so I would just like, if you're serious about getting feedback from all of our neighborhoods and our community boards, they do move a little bit slower, but the community residents have a lot of good things to say. And so I would like to ask that you consider pushing this back a month or two to give more people time to give more input. The second question I have to ask is in terms of the input that you've already received that informed these text amendments that you've presented. Are you able to tell us if there's if they're coming from kind of concentrated from certain areas geographically that are sending you these requests? Are they like individual business people, or bids, or like chambers of commerce or something? I'm just trying to get a sense of who the people are who are giving feedback that has led to your proposals. And again, I'm just trying to understand why these are citywide amendments as opposed to, going to certain neighborhoods to do rezonings if there's like a lot of people asking for these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll try and answer your questions in reverse order. So part of the reason why they're citywide amendments is we believe that the changes we're proposing this evening are applicable on a citywide basis. And so each of the changes that we're making would be to the underlying zoning text for all 5 boroughs, all 59 community districts. And so that's why we're proposing a citywide text amendment route. Regarding folks we've heard of, my short answer is it's all of the above of the folks you mentioned. We've heard from businesses directly. We've heard from business improvement districts and folks who are directly on the ground trying to fill empty space in their commercial corridors. We've heard from industrial service providers and folks who are trying to support our city's industrial businesses. We've heard from chambers of commerce who want to make sure that we are supporting and having opportunities for business in the city overall. And this is now our 4th public info session. So we've heard from many folks like yourselves over the last several years. Our first one was last October. So we were starting to form these proposals even before then, and continuing to iterate and get feedback as we went through the process. So that takes me to your first question, which is on the timeline. Now, we don't even start the formal comment period until October. And the reason why we are speaking with you all tonight is in part to continue to get your feedback. And so I so appreciate yours and everyone for being on this call this evening and sharing with us your perspective, your experiences, the questions you have, and giving us opportunities to clarify and take things back. So we're going to start the formal comment period in October, and then that starts the 60-day clock. And so that hopefully is able to have enough time, and please let us know where you have questions.
All right, thank you, Matt. And with that, we want to be respectful of time. We're about 15 minutes over. So there was one question that came out to me and it said, I would like to help. How do I reach out to you?
Sure.
So yeah, you want to give the email address?
Absolutely. So if you want to help, or if you would like to provide more feedback, you can reach out to us at economicopportunity@planning.nyc.gov. And just thank you for your interest in helping and spreading the word. And thank you all for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Matt. And just a reminder, our website has more information and has links to all of the recordings of these, and we've taken note of every question that was asked tonight, and we'll make sure that we're addressing these questions within future presentations. And please reach out, please sign up for our newsletter, and we look forward to continuing this conversation throughout the summer and the fall. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.